Welcome back to educator.com. Today we're going to go over the 2013 AP FRQ macroeconomics free response. So let's get right down to this material here. All right, so question number one actually is pretty much a standard question that you're going to get. You're dealing with the United States operating at full employment, and you're asked to draw the long-run aggregate supply, the short-run aggregate supply, the aggregate demand, and label the price level and output. So this is about as standard as you're going to get. The 2012 question was started off a little bit differently, but honestly, a lot of these questions are just going to recycle itself. So it's being able to identify, which graph is it going to be? Which of the 7 graphs is it going to be here? So real GDP here, and then you have the price level, and then you have the aggregate demand. You have the short-run aggregate supply, so you have the AD right here, and you have the SRAS. And don't forget the long-run aggregate supply, and again, it's in long-run equilibrium here. So this is going to be Y1 here, LRAS, and this here is going to be PL1. So if you have this, you get 1 point for showing the aggregate demand, SRAS, and the price level. And you get the second point by putting the LRAS where it intersects the SRAS and AD, and you label that at Y1 here. So that's an easy 2 points. That really should be like kicking an extra point for football. It's an automatic 2 points right there. So that is 1A. Okay, 1B, you're gonna get a little bit more difficult. But actually not really. I mean, this is another standard situation here. So assuming that Americans save more, yeah, right. Using a correctly labeled graph of the loanable funds market, you're trying to figure out what the impact of savings is going to have on interest rates. So this is the graph for loanable funds. So you draw this right here. And here you draw the quantity of loanable funds. And on the y-axis, you're going to get the real interest rate. And you have the demand for loanable funds. Label this as D1. But you also have the supply for loanable funds. So here's R1 here, and this is Q1. So the question is, you get 1 point here just for drawing the correctly labeled demand, supply, quantity of loanable funds, and real interest rate. Again, it seems kind of minor here, but if you don't really study for this, then you might label the quantity of loanable funds as real GDP. So you want to make sure that that's squared away, all the labeling. The second point you're going to get when you shift the supply curve to the right, because when there's an increase in loanable funds, then what ends up happening here is that there's an increase in supply of loanable funds, and as a result, the interest rates decrease here. So the quantity is going to increase from Q1 to Q2, but the real interest rates are going to go down here. So you get a second point showing that the real interest rates decrease here. If you want to write it out, real interest rates decrease. But it would be perfectly fine if you just drew an arrow and you showed it on the graph here. Part C. Part C deals with based on the real interest rate identified below. So you know that the real interest rate decreased here. What's going to happen to interest-sensitive expenditures here? Well, Y equals C plus I plus G plus NX. So basically, real interest decreases, consumption increases. So Y increases as well. So when interest rates decrease, I increases as well, and so does C, and as a result, Y increases as well here. So interest sensitive expenditures are going to increase, and what goes on here is that the economic growth rate economic growth will increase because investments will lead to higher capital formation. So if you get this right, you get 2 points for this particular problem here. So understanding what is the connection between real interest rates, interest expenditures, and what happens as a result to real GDP as a result. Okay, so that's 6 points so far here. Let's go to part D here. So part D is dealing with what is the real interest rate in the Eurozone. Let's say that the real interest rate increases relative to the United States. So interest rates are now higher in the Eurozone than it is in the United States. So what happens in the foreign exchange market for the euro? So euro is going to be on the x-axis and show the impact on the demand for the euro. So let's take a look right here. So here's the quantity of the euro. And so this is the dollar per the euro. And there's a demand for the euro. And there's a supply for the euro. So label this as E1 here. And this is Q1. So if interest rates are higher in Europe than they are in the United States, then the demand for the euro is going to increase. Because people are going to want to invest in Europe rather than the United States. So what ends up happening is that the exchange rate is more favorable to the euro here. So how's that manifested on this particular answer here? So you get 1 point here for drawing the correct supply and demand for the foreign exchange market. The second point is showing the demand curve increasing to the right. And when you do that, you see the increase in the value of the euro. And what the third point, you're going to have to connect this together. This is where it gets a little bit interesting. The value of the euro relative to the dollar. The third point is that you're going to connect it together. So because of the higher real interest rates in Europe relative to the US, investors from the US demand more euros, and as a result, the euro appreciates in value. So this will get you the third point. So if you just do this, you're just going to get that 2 points here. The third point really is in the explanation to be able to understand the connection behind this here. Now part E is actually kind of interesting because if you don't pay attention, you actually might get this wrong here, because you're assuming now you're shifting back to the United States. So the current account balance was 0. The euro has appreciated, right? So the euro has appreciated, meaning that in Europe, there's going to be a current account deficit because if the value of the currency has appreciated, then you're going to have a situation where they're in a current account deficit. But they're asking for the United States, and so the current account in the US will be a surplus because you have a depreciated currency. Again, if they're asking for the Eurozone, then you're going to have a current account in a deficit. But with a depreciated currency, there's going to be a current account surplus in the US, which currently we don't have in the United States as of the filming. But in this particular situation, when you have a situation where your currency has depreciated in value, assuming you start at a current account balance of 0, with that depreciated dollar, you're going to have a current account surplus. So that's question number 1. Let's move on to question number 2. So how does question number 2 look like? You have 5 points here, and you're dealing with Fisherland here, and you're dealing with production possibilities frontier. So being able to read the graph here, it's actually quite simple here. So redrawing this graph here, they ask you to look at this graph and tell, is there increasing opportunity costs of consumer goods only, capital goods only, both goods or no goods? So at the minimum, you have 25% chance. And the correct answer is going to be both goods. Both goods are going to have increasing opportunity costs. This is the idea. If you have a bowed out production possibilities frontier like this, then it's an increasing opportunity cost, whether or not you're going from consumer goods to capital goods. You're going to have increasing opportunity costs either way. Doesn't matter which way you're going up and down the production possibilities frontier. So this one's pretty straightforward here for part A. For part B, and again, that's point 1 here, or plus 1 point here. Redraw the graph given above and showing what happens if there's fully employed and utilizing all resources. How's that going to look like here? So let's redraw here capital goods, and you have consumer goods. Okay, so you're drawing the production possibilities frontier here, and label it as point A here. So if you label it as point A, and then you get that 1 point here. Now, in the 2012 FRQ, if you haven't done that already, they asked you to label A if it's underutilized, if it's in a recession, and so you'd put the A inside here. For part B, you label as A as being efficient or utilized, and then part C is actually labeling as part C where the recession is, or if there's a recession. Now, interestingly enough, they didn't put part B simply because they didn't want to get confused probably with B. So C represents a point of recession or underutilization, and A is going to represent a point of efficiency here. So this is basically 2 points here, since this is B and C here. So really 2 points for a really simple concept, the production possibilities frontier. So you want to make sure for this particular number 2 problem, it's not a whole lot of work to get those 3 points to start off with here. And the 4th point, again, is actually even more basic and straightforward, you can argue. If there's a recession, what fiscal policy action do you take? And there's actually one of 3 answers here. Either increase government spending, okay, you can actually decrease taxes, and thirdly, you can increase government transfers like Social Security or Medicare, welfare, which is very equivalent to increasing government spending, but any of these 3 will get you 1 point. Okay, part E, assume that nothing happens. What will the short run aggregate supply decrease, remain the same in the long run, or decrease? So increase, decrease, or remain the same. Now, they don't ask you to draw the graph, but we're going to go ahead and draw this as if you had to draw the graph, just to show you that it's really about knowing the situation rather than just blindly answering here. So here's a price level, and here's the real GDP. And then you have the aggregate demand here, and you have the short run aggregate supply. And remember, you're in a recession, so the long run aggregate supply is going to be, the long run aggregate supply is going to be to the right. Okay, so this is the LRAS, and in the short run here, this is going to be Y1, and this is going to be PL1 here. Okay, so let's assume no action is taken. Remember, this is the do nothing approach. Then the SRAS is going to shift to the right. So you're going to have SRAS2, and you're going to have Y2, and you're going to have PL2. So what's going to happen as a result? The SRAS is going to increase Y, and the reason why wages will decrease because they are flexible in the long run. They're no longer sticky. And as a result, and I'm just going to put an arrow, SRAS shifts to the right. Okay, so that will give you 1 point here. So you have 5 points overall for question number 2. So understanding the production possibilities frontier, fiscal policy, and in the long run, if you know classical economics. So you're really dealing with 3 different concepts here for question number 2. And the final question, which is question number 3, it's also worth, actually this one here is not worth 5 points here. It's actually worth 6 points here. So to be able to get this correct, you know, bodes well for your overall exam score here. If you take a look at this problem here, you're dealing with inflation and expected inflation. What's the impact with the short-run Phillips curve here? Now, keep in mind, if you just go with the concept that in the long run, inflation and unemployment have no correlation, in the short run, they're inversely related here. So the short run, you're just drawing the Phillips curve here. So part A, you're just drawing the Phillips curve here. So you have unemployment percent on the x-axis and inflation rate on the y-axis. Now, what would happen if you actually flip these two? It's possible, but the graph would, you know, when you make changes, you'd have to kind of take that into account. Most econ texts are going to deal with unemployment on the x and the inflation rate on the y-axis. Do not confuse inflation rate with interest rates. I know there are a lot of these graphs, you're going to have real and nominal interest rate on the y-axis, but with the Phillips curve, you just have the inflation rate, not the interest rate here. So you draw an SRPC here, and you just label it as such here. It's just SRPC, and SRPC1 is fine. So you get 1 point for that, just for drawing the graph. So what happens if there's an increase in the expected rate of inflation? This is where you get a shift of the SRPC. So SRPC turns now into SRPC2, and you have the second point. So just understanding how the SRPC shifts, you get the 2 points here on question number 3. Now, that is part B as well. Now, part C deals with what is the effect on expected rate of inflation on the long run Phillips curve. Notice they don't ask you to draw it. If you did, it's not incorrect, but they don't ask you to draw it, so let's not draw it here. And really, it's one of those questions where it's just no effect. There's no effect, no relationship, and so you get that 3rd point here. So not a lot of text in writing number 3, but keep in mind, hopefully this is a theme. As you're going through these FRQs, it's not about writing lengthy paragraphs. When possible, keep what you're writing to a minimum. Just go straight directly to the answer, draw the graph, label clearly, and there's a good chance you're going to get it right. Remember, these AP graders, you know, we've come to prefer brevity to lengthiness. So again, as an AP reader, I can vouch for the fact that these graders are looking for the direct answer. So there's no real reason to write extensively on something that can be answered in a simple phrase or a graph. Okay, for part ABC, you get 3 points here. Part D is dealing with the increase in expected inflation. So is the nominal rate going to either increase, decrease, or remain unchanged right here? So again, it's good to have the equation here. So real interest rate equals nominal interest rate minus expected inflation. Okay, so when you're dealing with this here, what's going to happen? So if the expected inflation is going to increase here, you know it's going to increase, and you know that the real interest rate basically stayed the same, so there's no change. What's going to happen to the nominal interest rate? Well, the nominal interest rate is going to increase as well. So, I mean, you can just write it out, or you can draw it out like this. Nominal interest rate increases. So you get that 1 point for simply showing the relationship. Again, have this memorized. Real interest rate equals the nominal interest rate minus the inflation rate. And sometimes you'll be asked to plug in numbers, but just know the general relationship between how inflation really has no bearing on the real interest rate. It will adjust the expected or the nominal rate, but changes in inflation has no impact on the real interest rate. Prices may go up, but the real interest rate actually will stay the same here. Okay, so part D, 2, will the real interest rate on new loans increase, decrease, or remain unchanged, right? And so it's kind of already answered in here. Real interest rate stays the same. Remember, the nominal interest rate goes up because expected inflation goes up, but the real interest rate stays the same here. Okay, so you get 2 points, 1 point here, 1 point here, and so for D, now this isn't DA, this is D1 and D2. Okay, and the final part, E, is a question which they actually probably give you too much information, so it's really simple math here. So you have the equation, real interest equals nominal interest rate and expected inflation. You know the nominal is 8%, so you put in 8% for nominal. And you know that the inflation rate is 3%. What is 8 minus 3, ladies and gentlemen? The answer is 5%. So the real interest rate, remember, equals the nominal interest rate minus expected inflation or inflation, and you have 8% nominal and you have 3% expected inflation, so the answer is 5%. Now the tricky part here is that you're also given extraneous information. You're told that the RGDP, or the real GDP growth rate, is 4%. Okay, and the tendency would be, oh, I got a number, I'm going to have to add it here or do something here. And basically, you just take a look and say, oh, that's great. The real GDP increased by 4%. That's great. Unemployment is probably down, but that has nothing to do with the fact that the real interest rate equals the nominal minus expected inflation. You just cancel that out and focus on what's nominal and what's real. 8 minus 3% equals 5%. That's it. Thank you for watching educator.com.